Legends are not just stories. They are warnings carved into time. What if the city of brass truly existed? What if the Djinn still whisper in the winds of the desert, unseen but ever watching? From Mesopotamian demons to Arabian spirits, from the shadows of Lilith to the amulets of Pazuzu, every culture has tried to name, bind, and survive the darkness. Tonight, you and I will walk that same path, unmasking the hidden world that terrified our ancestors and still lingers in ours. Are you ready to enter the silence where myths breathe and shadows speak? If this journey into forgotten legends and unseen worlds stirred your imagination, don't let it end here. Smash that like button to let the story live on, and hit subscribe so you never miss the next untold mystery from the dark corridors of history. And turn on the notification bell, because the next legend might just change the way you see the world forever. The old legends tell a story of a great expedition dispatched into the heart of the great sands on an impossible quest. Some later storytellers, to lend the tale an air of authenticity, would even give the leader a famous name, the Amir Musa ibn Nusay. Their objective was to find the mythical city of brass, and within it the brass bottles that King Solomon had used to imprison the most powerful of the Djinn. For months, the legend says, the expedition searched until they found it. A city of black stone with no entrance and no sound, its walls inscribed with a chilling warning. We built these walls, and we are no more. We have come to our end. And what a dreadful end it was. When they finally breached the walls, they found no bodies, no bones, only empty palaces, and a silence that was heavier than stone. But in the city's highest tower, they found what they were seeking. The first of the legendary bottles. Its seal stamped with the name of God still unbroken after 3,000 years. This tale from the collection of 1001 Nights is a work of fiction. But it is a fiction that points to a profound and enduring truth. It asks a question that resonates through the ages. What are the beings so powerful, so terrifying, and so real that they could inspire such a legend? They are the Djinn. The instinct that gives such power to the legend of that brass bottle comes from the oldest part of the human mind. It is a fear born in a time before history, before writing, before even the idea of gods. It is the fundamental human reaction to an uncertain world, the deep and abiding need to understand the consciousness that lives in the dark. This primal instinct is the bedrock of a worldview known as animism. Animism is a sophisticated and coherent worldview that perceives the entire natural world as being alive with personhood. It is the understanding that every river, mountain, and ancient tree possesses a consciousness, a will, and a story. The world to our ancient ancestors was a community of subjects, not a collection of objects. This worldview was a deeply relational one built on a complex system of respect and communication. The rituals of early humanity were performed to maintain a delicate balance with the spirits of the land, the animals, and the elements. This was a partnership, an ongoing dialogue to ensure mutual survival, where a passing eagle could be greeted as a respected participant in a ceremony. Its presence a sign of approval. This perception of a world filled with active, conscious persons with whom humanity was in constant dialogue was the necessary first step in our story. It created the psychological architecture required for any belief in a hidden world to flourish. It tilled the soil of the human mind, preparing it for the eventual arrival of angels, demons, and the beings of smokeless fire. The first great harvest from that freshly tilled soil would rise from the Fertile Crescent between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Here in Mesopotamia, humanity's first cities gave rise to its first organized systems of belief. As societies grew more complex, so too did their pantheons of the unseen, evolving from a relational worldview into a model of active confrontation and magical defense. This was a critical evolution in thought. The spirits were given names, domains, and specific functions. They were categorized and studied. One class of malevolent spirit was the Lilitu, nocturnal demons from ancient Sumerian belief who haunted desolate places, brought disease on the wind, and preyed upon infants and pregnant women. This gave a terrifying personal form to the primal fears of the dark. This ancient concept of a predatory female night spirit was incredibly resilient. It journeyed through the cultures of the ancient world for nearly 4 millennia. It was eventually inherited by Jewish folklore, where in the medieval period it was transformed into the singular figure of Lilith, the legendary first wife of Adam. This later story of a defiant primordial woman is a powerful myth in its own right, a fascinating evolution of the much more ancient Mesopotamian fear of the demons of the night. Equally terrifying was Pazuzu, the king of the wind demons. He was the personification of the scorching desert wind that brought famine and disease. Yet Pazuzu embodied a dualistic nature, functioning both as a terrifying demon of the scorching winds and as a powerful amuletic protector against other malevolent spirits. He was a weaponized fear, a monster used to fight other monsters. His primary protective function was to defend pregnant women and infants against his great rival, the demon's Lamashtu, a terrifying figure who was believed to snatch newborns from their cradles. An amulet bearing the image of Pazuzu was a piece of spiritual technology, a direct appeal to one evil to save you from a greater one. This marks the birth of codified exorcism and protective magic. The Mesopotamians, through these figures, accomplished something monumental. They transformed the vague dread of the unknown into a catalog of specific entities. They gave spirits a name, a form, and a story. This act of codifying the invisible world, of creating a taxonomy for demons, was a crucial, intellectual leap. It established a tradition of supernatural scholarship that would one day be perfected in the deserts of Arabia. The Mesopotamian tradition was a reflection of a timeless human imperative, the drive to impose order upon chaos. The goal was to transform a formless existential dread into a specific adversary with a name, a nature, and a set of rules. An unknown. Terror is infinite. But a named demon is a problem that can be studied, confronted, and potentially overcome. This process represents one of the greatest leaps in human consciousness. It is the moment we began to systematize our fears to build a great spiritual architecture that could house all the terrors of the world, assigning each to its proper room and writing its name above the door. This act of naming is a profound act of power, an assertion of intellectual dominion over the forces of the night. It was this ancient and deeply ingrained habit of the human mind. This need to catalog the unseen and to define the spirits of the world that created the perfect cultural and psychological environment for the birth of a new and far more complex entity. An entity that would be forged in the vast empty deserts that lay just beyond Mesopotamia's reach. That desert has a name, the Rub Alkali, the Empty Quarter. It is the largest continuous sand desert in the world, a landscape defined by its profound and overwhelming emptiness. For the ancient peoples of Arabia, this environment was the central fact of their existence, shaping their culture, their psychology, and their gods. The desert functioned as an active participant in the lives of its inhabitants, a hostile entity with its own perceived will. The sun was a tool of affliction. The wind was an abrasive force that could strip the land to bedrock, and the silence was a physical presence, a heavy blanket that could amplify the slightest unexplainable sound. This landscape was a natural engine of hallucination. The shimmering heat gave birth to the mirage, a vision of water and life that was a cruel deception. The wind whistling through rock formations created whispers and cries that mimicked the human voice. These sensory tricks were interpreted as the actions of unseen beings, the native inhabitants of the waste. This profound emptiness, however, is a relatively recent phenomenon. Geological history reveals that, as recently as 3,000 years ago, this region experienced wet phases with vast lakes and river systems supporting abundant life. The belief in spirits haunting desolate ruins may be more than just a fear of the dark. It may be a deep cultural memory of a time when these now empty places were vibrant centers of human and animal life. In the arid world that followed, any feature that broke the monotony became a sacred space. A lonely mountain, a shaded canyon, or a life-giving oasis was believed to be the domain of a powerful guardian spirit. Survival depended on knowing which spirits were benevolent and which were territorial, requiring appeasement before a traveler could safely approach a source of water or shelter. The settled feature-bound spirits were one thing. The true terror belonged to the open sands. This vast emptiness was the logical domain for things that were nomadic and unseen, for beings who were as formless, as shifting, and as dangerous as the desert itself. This was the natural habitat for the precursors to the Djinn. The belief in a spirit world was a psychological necessity for survival in the empty quarter. The human mind, which abhors a vacuum, populated the immense physical void of the desert with a complex and invisible ecology. The people of ancient Arabia created a rich map of the unseen world because it was the only way to make sense of the overwhelming emptiness of their own. Music. The most important points on that unseen map were the places the spirits chose to touch the physical world. For the pre-Islamic tribes, certain objects and locations became nexuses of power. A Nile Dicacia tree that survived for centuries, or a strange dark stone were seen as physical anchors for their invisible guardians. These sacred stones were known as battles, a term from Semitic languages meaning the literal house of a god or Bethel. These spirits functioned as immediate partners. In survival, their presence intimately woven into the daily life of the tribe. Each tribe, and often each family, had its own patron spirit, its own Djinn to which it owed allegiance. This relationship was a sacred contract, a pact of mutual obligation, where the tribe's veneration was exchanged for the spirit's protection, its guidance in finding water, and its aid in battle. The worship was intensely personal and physical. The tribes would anoint these battles with oil. They would hang offerings of cloth and beads from the branches of sacred trees, and they would circumambulate these sites, chanting praise and petitioning for favor. This physical ritual solidified the bond between the seen and the unseen worlds. Music. This system of belief created a complex spiritual landscape. The territories of tribes were also the territories of their patron Djinn. To enter another tribe's land was to enter the domain of a foreign and potentially hostile spirit. This gave a supernatural dimension to tribal warfare and alliances, turning earthly conflicts into reflections of battles in the spirit realm. Over time, a hierarchy began to form within this spirit world. Certain powerful Djinn associated with particularly important tribes or locations, like the city of Mecca, were elevated in status. They became more than mere tribal protectors. They evolved into regional deities with their own temples, their own priesthoods, and their own distinct identities. The most powerful of these were the three goddesses known as Alat, Al-Usuza, and Manat. The Quranic tradition describes these figures and criticizes the Meccan pagans for worshipping them with the title, the Daughters of Allah, with Allah being the name of the Supreme, Creator God. This reflects the Islamic understanding of mechanism, where these powerful female Djinn turned goddesses were seen as intercessors to a higher, more remote power. This structure is absolutely critical to our story. The Djinn of pre-Islamic Arabia occupied a vast theological space. They were everything from the localized, feature-bound nature spirit to the tribal protector, to the powerful, elevated goddess who served as an intermediary to the highest creator. It was this complex, deeply embedded and hierarchical system of belief that the coming revelation would directly confront and radically dismantle. Beyond their role as guardians and gods, these spirits held a more intimate and more intellectually profound function in the pre-Islamic world. They were seen as the direct source of the highest form of human art and knowledge, poetry. In the oral culture of the desert, the poet or shahir was the keeper of the tribe's memory, its most potent political weapon, and its conduit to the truth. The shahir's creative genius was perceived as an external gift, a direct transmission of knowledge from a supernatural entity. Each great poet was believed to have a personal djinn, a spirit familiar who acted as their muse and teacher. This belief meant that the poet was a vessel, a spokesman for a being who had access to secrets, histories, and a command of language far beyond any mortal capacity. To find this inspiration, a poet would venture alone into the desolate places of the wilderness. This journey into the empty landscape was a ritual communion, a deliberate entry into the liminal space where the veil between the worlds was thin. There, in the profound silence, the poet would listen for the voice of their familiar, receiving the verses that would give the tribe its identity. The poems delivered by the Shah were the tribe's living archive. They contained detailed genealogies that established rights to wells and grazing lands. They chronicled the tribe's greatest victories in battle, and they served as a vehicle for the most feared form of political attack, the satire or hija, a poem so skillfully insulting it could permanently destroy a rival's reputation. Poetic contests between tribes were a common occurrence. These were understood as direct confrontations between the poets' respective jinn. The jewel of verses was a supernatural battle, a test of which poet's spirit familiar was more powerful, more eloquent, and possessed of deeper knowledge. A victory in these contests brought immense honor to the entire tribe. The poet, therefore, was a figure of immense power and supernatural authority. He was the voice of the tribe's past and the shaper of its future. This deep foundational belief that the Djinn were the ultimate source of the most powerful and beautiful human language was another pillar of the old world, a pillar that the new revelation would have to address directly where the poet sought the Djinn, for eloquence and art. Another figure sought them for a more practical and urgent purpose, knowledge. This was the domain of the Kahin, the tribal soothsayer. The Kahin operated as a shamanic figure, a practitioner who directly communed with the spirit world to gain hidden intelligence about the past, the present, and the future. The Kahin would enter a trance-like state, often wrapping themselves in a cloak and chanting until a connection was made. The prophecies they delivered were spoken in a unique form of ecstatic rhyming prose known as SJ. This rhythmic, often obscure language was believed to be the native tongue of the Djinn themselves, the sound of the unseen world breaking through into the human. Their services were essential to the functioning of pre-Islamic society. The Kahin was consulted to find lost livestock, a matter of life and death in the desert. They were called upon to mediate disputes by determining guilt or innocence, and they were petitioned to predict the outcome of raids and battles, their words guiding the chieftain's most critical decisions. The source of the Kahin's power was their personal Djinn familiar, a spirit known as a Rai. This spirit partner acted as a supernatural scout, traveling vast distances in an instant or eavesdropping on the conversations of other Djinn to gather the required information. The kin's authority was a direct measure of their familiar's power and reliability. The pronouncements of the Kahin were often delivered in cryptic verses rich with ambiguity. This obscurity served a vital function. It protected the Kahin if events proved their predictions wrong, allowing for reinterpretation, and it enhanced their mystique, suggesting a knowledge so profound it could only be partially translated for mortal minds. These figures were therefore held in a state of simultaneous fear and reverence. They were outsiders dwelling on the margins of the tribe, yet they were indispensable to its survival. Their power was immense, but it was also conditional, resting entirely on the continued belief in their connection to the unseen world and the tangible results their prophecies produced. And so, the stage is set. The unseen world of pre-Islamic Arabia is a vibrant and deeply integrated aspect of human life. It is a world populated by a vast spectrum of entities, from the humble spirit of an oasis to the tribal guardian in its sacred stone, to the great goddesses of Mecca, to the poet's muse and the soothsayer's informant. This entire complex spiritual ecosystem, which had governed life in the desert for 1,000 years, was about to face a force that would redefine it forever. The force that redefined that ancient world was a text. The revelations that would become the Quran, delivered to the Prophet Muhammad in the 7th century, initiated a complete theological revolution. This new scripture did not deny the existence of the beings the Arabs called the Djinn. It absorbed them, validated their existence, and then radically, permanently altered their nature and cosmic standing. The Quranic revelation presents a comprehensive reordering of the supernatural world, absorbing existing beliefs into a new, strictly monotheistic framework. The hundreds of tribal spirits, patron guardians, and regional goddesses were stripped of all divinity. The text states unequivocally that these beings were created entities just like humans, and that worshipping them was the cardinal sin of shirk, the act of associating partners with the one singular God. This was a profound emotion. The Jinn were transformed from objects of worship into subjects of God, accountable for their own actions on a future day of judgment. The powerful goddesses of Mecca, Alat, Al-Usuza, and Manat were recast as mere Jinn, their temples and rituals condemned as idolatry. The Quran severed the sacred contracts that had bound the tribes to their patrons for centuries. Yet even as it demoted them, the Quran gave the Jinn a new and profound legitimacy. Their existence was now confirmed by divine revelation, their reality cemented in sacred scripture. They were no longer just a feature of local folklore, but a confirmed component of the cosmic order. The book that stripped them of their power also gave them a permanent place in history. This validation had a specific purpose. The Quran describes itself as a message sent to the two worlds, the world of humanity and the world of the Jinn. By confirming their existence and their capacity for reason and moral choice, the text establishes them as a parallel civilization, another race of beings with free will who are also being called to the path of monotheism. This act of theological reclassification is one of the most intellectually compelling aspects of the Jinn story. The Quran took the raw, chaotic material of Arabian folklore, the desert spirits, the poet's muse, the soothsayer's informant, and passed it through the clarifying fire of monotheism. What emerged was something new, a species, a people, a hidden race given a formal place in the divine schema of creation. To give this new species its proper place in the cosmic order, the Quran defines the very element from which it is made. It states that the Jinn were created from marajun minor, an Arabic phrase most often translated as a smokeless flame, but also carrying connotations of a mixture of fire or a confusing flame. This is the single most important concept for understanding the fundamental nature of the Jinn. The first part of the concept is fire, or Na. In classical elemental thought, fire represents the principle of energy, of passion, of ambition, and of volatility. By tying the Jinn to this substance, the Quran frames them as beings of immense energy, driven by powerful emotions and capable of swift, decisive action. The second part of the concept is its smokeless quality. Smoke is the impurity of a flame, the byproduct of an imperfect burn. A smokeless fire, therefore, is a pure, refined, and intensely hot form of energy. This purity implies a subtlety and a thinness to their being, allowing them to exist on a plane that is imperceptible to human senses. They are smokeless, and therefore unseen. Classical commentators have explored the depth of this term for centuries. The great mystic Ibn Arabi interpreted it as a mixture of the elements of fire and air, which accounts for the jinn's characteristic volatility and subtlety, their ability to be both intensely powerful and lighter than a breeze. This dual nature is the key to their every ability. Other interpretations link the substance directly to the sum, the scorching, poisonous desert wind. This elegantly connects the theological concept of the jinn back to the physical environment that shaped the pre-Islamic imagination. The jinn are in this view the living personification of the most terrifying and inescapable force of their native landscape, the lethal, fiery breath of the desert itself. Their fiery body grants them abilities that are impossible for a creature of clay. It allows them to travel at immense speeds, to pass through solid objects, and to change their shape at will, molding their energy into the form of a human, an animal, or a terrifying monster. Their invisibility is their natural state, the simple consequence of a body that exists on a different energetic frequency from our own. This fiery constitution also has profound moral implications. Fire provides warmth and light, but it also burns and destroys. The jinn's nature is one of extremes. Their passions are stronger, their pride is fiercer, and their capacity for both great piety and great evil is magnified. Their internal world is a place of constant burning intensity. The single phrase marriage min therefore functions as a complete cosmological blueprint. It explains their powers, their place in the universe, and their inherent psychological and spiritual tendencies. It is the master key that unlocks every other aspect of their existence, transforming them from a chaotic folk spirit into a coherent theological species. The definition of the jinn's fiery essence was part of a much grander, cosmological project. The Quranic revelations formally established a universe populated by three distinct peoples of creation. Each race is forged from a different core element, and each is assigned a different purpose in the divine order. The first and oldest of these peoples are the angels, the Mala. Forged from pure light, they are the functionaries of heaven. They are beings of perfect obedience, the direct instruments of God's will. Their defining characteristic is their complete lack of free will, meaning they are incapable of disobedience. They are the messengers, the guardians, and the enforcers of cosmic law. The second people are humanity, the insan. Forged from clay, a substance of the earth, humanity is given a unique and weighty responsibility. They are designated as God's Khalifa on earth, a term meaning vicegerent or steward. Their purpose is to live upon the land, to build civilizations, and to undergo a profound moral and spiritual test. And the third people are the jinn. Forged from smokeless fire, they exist as a parallel creation. They are older and more powerful than humanity, but they are not given the mandate of stewardship over the earth. They are a hidden nation, a race of beings with their own societies who inhabit the unseen spaces of the world, following a path that intersects with and often conflicts with our own. The single decisive trait that binds humanity and the jinn together is the gift and the burden of free will. It is this capacity for choice, the freedom to obey or to rebel, that makes them the central actors in the cosmic drama. The angels are perfect by nature. Humanity and the jinn must strive for righteousness with the ever-present possibility of failure. This shared freedom has profound consequences. It means that, like humans, the jinn can be believers or unbelievers. There are pious Muslim jinn, just as there are Christian, Jewish, and pagan jinn. They can choose to be righteous and benevolent, or they can choose to be malevolent and corrupt. Their fiery nature gives them great power, but their free will determines how that power is used. This theological framework creates a stable and understandable cosmos. The roles are now perfectly defined. The angels serve. Humanity builds and is tested, and the jinn exist as a hidden parallel race, also subject to the same ultimate test of faith. With this cosmic order established, the stage was set for the first great act of rebellion, an act that would forever define the relationship between the people of clay and the people of fire. That first great act of rebellion, however, is the subject of one of the most significant theological debates in early Islam. The question is profound and strikes at the very heart of the cosmic order. What exactly was the original nature of Elas, the first rebel? The answer would define the very concepts of angelic infallibility and the nature of free will. The source of the debate lies in the Quran itself. In several passages that describe the command to prostrate before Adam, God addresses the order to the angels, the Malaka. In these verses, Las is presented as the sole exception among their ranks, the only one who refuses the command. This led some early and rationalist schools of thought like the Mu'tazilites to a logical conclusion. They argued that if the command was addressed to the angels and Las was the one who disobeyed, then Las must have been an angel. For these scholars, this meant that angels possessed a form of free will and that Las was a high-ranking angel who, through his own arrogance, chose to rebel and was thus transformed or fell into a demonic being, a Cheyenne. This interpretation, however, posed a profound challenge to a core theological principle, the doctrine of angelic infallibility. If angels are made of pure light and are incapable of disobedience, as other verses suggest, how could one of them have sinned? The orthodox Sunni position eventually solidified around a different reading of the scripture, a reading that protected the perfect nature of the angels. This orthodox view is based on a clear and unambiguous statement in Surah 1850, which states, "They prostrated except Las. He was of the Djinn." This verse became the master key for interpreting all the others. It established Las as a Djinn, a being of fire who, due to his immense piety, dwelled in the company of the angels, but was never one of them. The grammatical construction of the exception in the other verses was then explained as a disjunctive exception. This means the one being excluded was not of the same class as the group. The command was issued to the assembly of angels, and Las the Djinn who stood among them was the one who refused. His disobedience was therefore an expression of Jinni free. Will not an angelic fall from grace? Presenting this as a historical debate, rather than a simple fact, is crucial. It reveals how early Islamic scholars wrestled with profound theological questions. The conclusion that Las was a Djinn from the start was the result of a deep intellectual process that chose to preserve the absolute purity of the angels, and in doing so made a Djinn the central actor in the cosmic drama of pride, rebellion, and the eternal war for the soul of humanity. That eternal conflict began at the moment of humanity's birth. According to the Quranic narrative, after God had fashioned the first man, Adam, from clay, he breathed a soul into him and taught him the names of all things, granting him knowledge. Then God gathered the entire assembly of heaven, the angels and the Djinn, for a demonstration of this new creation's honor. This assembly was a gathering of all the conscious created beings in the cosmos. It included the angels, the beings of light who were incapable of disobedience, and it included the Djinn, the beings of fire who possessed free will. At the head of the Djinn and dwelling among the most pious of the angels was a figure of immense standing and great devotion, Bliss, the most prominent of the Djinn present in the assembly. Then the divine command was issued. God ordered the entire assembly to prostrate themselves before Adam. This was a gesture of respect, an acknowledgement of Adam's special station as God's steward on earth. The command was an absolute and universal test of loyalty directed at all of God's conscious creations. In an instant, the cosmic order affirmed itself. The angels, being creatures of pure obedience, prostrated without question. Their light bent towards the earth in a wave of perfect submission. The vast majority of the Djinn, recognizing the divine source of the command, also obeyed their fire, bowing in allegiance to God's will. but a single being remained standing. Bliss, the great worshipper, the one who had stood in the company of angels, refused the command. He stood upright, a solitary pillar of defiance in a universe of obedience. His refusal was a silent, shocking act of rebellion, a schism that tore through the fabric of heaven. This moment is the pivot upon which the entire history of the Djinn and their relationship with humanity turns. It is the first primordial sin, a sin born not of temptation or of passion, but of something far more fundamental and dangerous. It was a sin of pure intellectual arrogance. The silence was then broken by the voice of God, addressing the lone dissenter directly. The question was simple and direct. What prevented you from prostrating when I commanded you? The question was an offering of mercy, a final chance for Las to relent, to acknowledge his error, and to submit to the divine will. Las of ultimate trial chose defiance. He chose to answer the divine question with a defense of his actions, an argument for his own superiority. He gave a voice to his pride, and in doing so he articulated the rationale for the first sin in creation. I am better than him, he declared. With this single sentence, Las Est established the foundation of his entire rebellion. It was an appeal to the inherent nature of things, a claim of superiority based on the very substance of his creation. He continued his argument, explaining to the Creator the logic of his creation. You created me from fire and him from clay. This is a theological argument of immense significance. Las's argument stemmed from a belief in a natural hierarchy of elements, a form of elemental racism where fire was inherently superior to clay. Fire is an active, energetic, and luminous substance. Clay is a passive, dense, and dark substance. In his eyes, the command to bow was a violation of this natural order. This logic reveals a profound spiritual blindness. Las could only perceive the value of the physical form, the elemental shell. He saw fire's volatility and clay's inertness. He failed to see the true source of Adam's honor, the divine soul that God had breathed into him, and the divine knowledge of the names that God had taught him. Music. His pride made him blind to the divine will. He placed his own judgment based on a superficial analysis of materials above the direct and unambiguous command of his own Creator. He saw the order to prostrate as a mistake, a cosmic injustice that his superior intellect could identify and was therefore obligated to resist. This is the very definition of arrogance, the belief that one's own perception and reasoning are a higher authority than the divine source of all reason itself. It is a pride so profound that it leads a being to lecture God on the proper nature of his own creation. It is a pride that sees obedience not as a virtue, but as a humiliation. And so the argument was made and the sin was complete. Las had received a command, refused it, and then proudly justified his refusal with a logic that elevated his own status above that of God's chosen steward. With his case made, there was only one possible outcome, the judgment and the fall. The judgment for this act of supreme arrogance was swift and absolute. Las was cursed by God, stripped of his honored position, and cast out from the divine presence. His name, which had been associated with piety, was gone. He was now given a new title, a descriptor of his new nature, Ash-Shaitan, an Arabic term meaning the adversary or the rebellious one. This transformation is crucial. Shaitan is a title, a designation for the ultimate spiritual rebel. Las became the first Shaitan, the archetype and the progenitor of all who would follow his path of prideful disobedience. His individual act of rebellion became a universal principle of cosmic evil. Yet even in his fall, his pride remained unbroken. The Shaitan did not beg for forgiveness, for his arrogance blinded him to his own error. Instead, he made a request. He asked God for a reprieve, a stay of final punishment until the day of judgment when all of creation would receive its final sentence. This audacious request was granted. The divine wisdom in this decision is a cornerstone of Islamic theology. By allowing the shaitan to exist and to operate in the world, God established the ultimate framework for the test of humanity. True faith, true righteousness, must be chosen in the face of a genuine and powerful alternative. With his continued existence assured, the shaitan then made his great vow. He swore an oath that he would dedicate his entire being until the end of time to proving that God's creation of humanity was a mistake. He declared his eternal mission to mislead the children of Adam to prove them unworthy of the honor they had been given. He detailed his strategy. He would not use force but subtlety. He would assail them from before them and from behind them, from their right and from their left. This was a declaration of a psychological war, a war of whispers. He would exploit their pride, their greed, their envy, and their desires to lead them away from the path of submission. And so the transformation was complete. The devout Djinn was gone forever, consumed by his own pride. In his place stood the shaitan, the great adversary, the self-declared enemy of humanity. The primordial conflict was no longer about a single act of disobedience in heaven. It was now a permanent spiritual war with the soul of every human being as the battlefield. That spiritual war began with the very first humans. The shaitan's first target was Adam and his partner Eve in the paradise of Eden. There he employed the signature tactic that would define his entire mission, the whisper of temptation. He exploited their desires and their curiosity, casting doubt upon the divine command and leading them to the one tree that had been forbidden. The success of this first temptation established the rules of engagement for all time. The shaitan's power is limited to temptation and insinuation, a method known as waswasa or the whispering. He is a psychological warrior who preys upon the inherent weaknesses of the human soul, arrogance, greed, envy, and despair. He makes the path of sin seem beautiful and the path of righteousness seem arduous. Crucially, the shaitan has no authority to force a human being to act. The final decision, the ultimate responsibility for choosing right from wrong, always rests with the individual. The whisper is merely a suggestion, an evil thought presented as one's own. It is humanity's free will, the very quality that makes them worthy of honor, that also makes them vulnerable to this attack. To wage this eternal war, the shaitan became a recruiter. He appealed to the pride and the rebellious instincts of other jinn, gathering to his cause those who, like him, resented the station of humanity or who simply delighted in corruption. These followers, also known as shaitan or devils, became his lieutenants and foot soldiers in the war against faith. This army of tempters works to sever the connection between humanity and the divine. They are the source of evil thoughts during prayer. They are the voices that encourage despair in moments of hardship. And they are the architects of grand illusions, making worldly power and fleeting pleasure seem more important than eternal salvation. This framework transforms the story of loss from a simple myth into a living psychological and spiritual reality. It posits that the internal struggle every human faces, the battle between their conscience and their baser instincts, is a direct echo of this primordial conflict. The whispers in the mind are the whispers of the adversary testing the strength of one's faith. And so the rebellion of one supremely arrogant jinn established a permanent cosmic drama. It is a drama that plays out on the grand stage of history and in the silent theater of the human heart. The fall of Los was not an ending. It was the beginning of a story in which every human being and every jinn must ultimately choose a side. The choice to follow the shaitan or to remain faithful to God was a choice presented to the entire jinn race. For the Quranic revelations and the scholarly traditions that followed described the jinn as a vast and populous civilization, a hidden nation that lives and breathes in the unseen spaces of our own world. Islamic tradition depicts jinn society as a complex tapestry of distinct tribes and nations known as Qabail. These divisions mirror the social structures of humanity. They have their own territories, their own customs, their own political alliances, and their own long-standing rivalries. The world of the Djinn is as politically and culturally diverse as the world of mankind. These unseen nations inhabit the liminal spaces of the human world. They dwell in ruins, in the deep desert, in forests, and at crossroads. Many are said to live directly alongside humans, sharing their houses, frequenting their marketplaces, and observing the unfolding drama of human life from behind a veil of invisibility. Like human societies, their communities require governance. Tradition speaks of the Djinn having kings, chieftains, and councils of elders who rule over their specific tribes. These rulers are often depicted as immensely powerful figures commanding legions of lesser Djinn and governing vast unseen kingdoms. Their courts are said to be places of great splendor or terrible darkness, depending on the moral alignment of the king. This political landscape is far from peaceful. The same division caused by the rebellion of Las runs through Djinn society. The believing pious Djinn are often at war with the unbelieving malevolent tribes who have allied themselves with the Cheyenne. The unseen world is therefore a place of constant conflict, a spiritual battle with very real political and territorial consequences. Folkloric and scholarly texts often describe powerful Djinn monarchs by name, treating them as historical figures with their own dynasties and legacies. These accounts speak of great kingdoms hidden in the mountains of Kaf, the mythical mountain, range said to encircle the earth. From these remote strongholds, Djinn kings are said to govern empires that dwarf their human equivalents in both age and size. The picture that emerges from these traditions is one of a complete parallel civilization. It is a society with its own leaders, its own conflicts, and its own complex internal politics. The Djinn are an unseen nation, a hidden empire of fire and shadow whose story unfolds just beyond the limits of our perception. Their existence a silent, constant mirror to our own. A civilization is defined by more than its politics. It is defined by its culture, its families, and its faith. The Islamic scholarly tradition building on the Quranic foundation explores all these facets of Djinn life. It paints a picture of a people whose internal world is a direct reflection of humanity's own spiritual diversity. Because they possess free will, the Djinn must also choose their faith. The Quran describes a group of Djinn who overheard its recitation, recognized its truth, and became Muslims. Tradition expands on this, stating that the Djinn, like humanity, are divided into all the world's religions. There are Muslim, Christian, and Jewish Djinn, and there are the pagan or infidel Djinn who follow the path of the shaitan. This parallel extends to the core of their social structure, the family. The Djinn are born, they grow, they marry among their own kind, and they raise children. They form complex kinship networks and family units that are the building blocks of their tribes. This capacity for love, for parental care, and for familial loyalty makes them far more than simple spirits. It makes them a people. Tradition even delves into the specifics of their biology and diet. Prophetic traditions state that the food of the believing Djinn is any bone upon which a human has eaten, which is restored for them with flesh. The food of their animals, in turn, is animal dung. These details, while strange, serve a profound theological purpose. They ground the Djinn in a tangible biological reality subject to the same needs as other living creatures. Most importantly, the Djinn are mortal. The Djinn possess vast lifespans, experiencing time on a scale far greater than humanity. They can live for thousands of years, witnessing the rise and fall of human empires as if they were fleeting seasons. But they are not eternal. They age, they grow weak, and eventually they die. This mortality is the great equalizer. It means that, like humans, every Djinn will face the final day of judgment. Their long lives are simply a longer test, a greater accumulation of choices for which they will be held accountable before God. Their power and their lifespan offer them no escape from the ultimate consequences of their free will. The traditions even explore the permeability of the veil between the two peoples, discussing the possibility of friendship, enmity, and even marriage between humans and Djinn. These tales, while often folkloric, highlight a deep-seated belief in a shared reality, a universe where the lives of the two creations are deeply and mysteriously intertwined. These details of faith, family, food, and death complete the portrait of the Djinn as a true parallel civilization. They transform them from alien entities into a people whose struggles, whose loves, and whose ultimate spiritual destiny are a fiery reflection of our own. They are a hidden branch of creation, living a life that is both profoundly different and hauntingly familiar. The intertwining of these two worlds, one of clay and one of fire, is governed by a strict set of rules. The veil that separates humanity from the Djinn is a permeable barrier, and its integrity depends on the actions of both peoples. Tradition holds that while the Djinn can see us, we in our normal state cannot see them, creating a fundamental and dangerous asymmetry. Music. This invisibility is the default state of engagement. It allows the Djinn to move through our world as silent observers, a constant unseen presence in our homes and cities. This power imbalance places a heavy burden of caution on humanity, for the most common source of conflict is an accidental transgression, an act of violence committed against an unseen victim. Islamic folklore is filled with cautionary tales on this very subject. A man who throws a stone into an empty waste might strike a Djinn. A woman who pours boiling water onto the ground might scold a Djinn child. In these cases, the Djinn, seeing their family harmed by what appears to be a malicious attack from a giant, will often seek a terrible revenge. This accidental harm is the most frequent justification given for cases of demonic possession. For the Djinn to intentionally cross the veil and interact with our world, they must take on a physical form. This is the power of shape-shifting. Their fiery, energetic nature allows them to mold their essence into the form of another creature. The most common forms they are said to adopt are those of snakes, scorpions, and especially black dogs. These specific forms became archetypes of danger. Prophetic traditions explicitly warn against harming snakes found in houses without first giving them a 3-day warning to leave in case the animal is a Djinn in disguise. The black dog, in particular, is often referred to in traditions as a manifestation of the shaitan, a physical vessel for a malevolent demonic force. While most dangerous contact is accidental, it can also be intentional. A human sorcerer might deliberately breach the veil, using forbidden rituals to summon, bind, and command a Djinn to do their bidding. This is seen as a profound violation of the natural order. A human seizing power that was never intended for them with catastrophic consequences for the soul. The rules of engagement are therefore built on a foundation of mutual, though often ignored, respect for boundaries. The relationship is defined by human blindness and Djinni invisibility. Conflict arises when humans act carelessly in a world they cannot fully see, or when a Djinn uses its power to deceive and harm the world of clay. And the greatest danger of all comes when a human actively seeks to shatter the veil and enslave the inhabitants of the unseen. Music. For every story of a malevolent shape-shifting Djinn, there is a counter-narrative of piety and faith. The Quran and the traditions that followed it make it clear that the path of the shaitan was a choice, not a destiny. There exists among the Djinn a vast community of believers, the righteous who chose the path of submission to God. The pivotal moment for these believers was the revelation of the Quran itself. Islamic tradition recounts a specific event where the Prophet Muhammad was reciting the holy book in a valley near Mecca. A passing group of Djinn overheard the recitation, recognized its divine truth, and immediately accepted it. They then returned to their own people, becoming apostles to the unseen nation. This event established a direct spiritual link between the two communities of believers. The pious Djinn function as a hidden community of believers living by the same moral and religious laws as their human counterparts. They pray, they fast, and they make their own pilgrimage to the sacred sites, all from within their unseen state. These believing Djinn are often portrayed as allies and protectors of humanity. They are the unseen guardians who may intervene to protect a pious person from the machinations of their malevolent brethren. Stories from the lives of the early Muslims describe encounters where believing Djinn would offer warnings, share knowledge, or provide aid in moments of crisis. They are also participants in the human quest for knowledge. Scholars of the Islamic Golden Age wrote of pious Djinn who would attend the lectures of great human jurists and theologians. These unseen students would sit in the mosques and libraries, absorbing the intricacies of religious law and carrying that knowledge back to their own tribes. Music. And so the civilization of the Djinn is a perfect mirror to our own, containing the full spectrum of morality. It is a world of corrupt kingdoms ruled by followers of the shaitan, but it is also a world of faithful communities who strive for righteousness. This moral complexity is the ultimate legacy of their free will, a testament to the fact that fire like clay can be molded to serve the light or the darkness. With the world of the Djinn established, we now turn to the one human figure who looms largest in their story, Suleiman ibn Daud, the prophet King Solomon. To unmask this legend, however, we must first understand that we are speaking of three distinct figures separated by centuries of history and storytelling. There is the historical king, the Quranic prophet, and the master magician of folklore. The first and oldest of these faces is the historical King Solomon, a ruler of the United Monarchy of Israel in the 10th century BCE. He was a king of flesh and blood, a man of immense wisdom and wealth, renowned in the annals of his people, for undertaking the monumental task of building the first temple in Jerusalem. He was a powerful but entirely human figure from the Iron Age, a builder of kingdoms and a player in the geopolitics of his time. The second face, revealed more than 500 years later, is the Quranic prophet Suleiman, described in the revelations of the 7th century CE. This is Solomon transfigured into a paradigm of just kingship and a profound sign of God's power. The Quran bestows upon him miracles that transcend the abilities of any mortal king. Command over the wind, the ability to understand the speech of birds, and a divinely enforced authority over the Djinn. This scriptural account is the theological bedrock of the legend. It recounts the specific prayer that unlocked his power. My Lord, forgive me, and grant me a kingdom such as will not belong to anyone after me. The Quran establishes that his dominion over the Djinn was a direct answer to this prayer. It was a miracle, an absolute subjugation that was fundamentally distinct from the forbidden practice of sorcery. The final face is the Solomon of legend, the master magician born in the centuries after the Quran. This is the Solomon of the Islamic Golden Age and its folklore, the star of tales, like 1001 Nights. This legendary figure takes the theological foundation of the Quranic prophet and expands it into a world of epic fantasy, creating the beloved and terrifying stories of magical rings, sealed brass bottles, and an unseen army of enslaved spirits. To truly understand the story of Solomon and the Djinn, we must carefully peel back these layers. We must move from the man of history to the prophet of scripture, and finally, to the great sorcerer king of legend. It is a journey that reveals how a historical king was transformed into a symbol of divine power and finally into the ultimate master of the unseen world. The Quranic foundation of Solomon's power over the Djinn as builders became the seed for one of the most enduring legends of the Islamic Golden Age. The storytellers and scholars of this later period took that sparse scriptural reference and expanded it into a grand epic narrative, the supernatural construction of the great temple in Jerusalem. This was the first great task for Solomon's unseen army. In these legends, Solomon's command initiated a project of impossible scale and speed, a physical testament to his miraculous kingdom. The human laborers, though skilled, were unequal to the task, and so Solomon issued his decree to the legions of the Djinn, commanding them to become his workforce to apply their fiery energy and supernatural abilities to the task of building the house of God. The folklore describes a diverse workforce of supernatural artisans. The most powerful and rebellious among them, the fiery Efrit, were assigned the hardest labor. They were the demonic quarrymen who split mountains, and the masons who lifted stones the size of buildings, fitting them together with inhuman precision. They erected the colossal walls of the temple, working tirelessly under Solomon's unyielding command. Another contingent of Djinn, as described in these tales, were commanded to become diverse. They plunged into the depths of the sea, a realm inaccessible to mortal man, to harvest the treasures of the ocean floor. They returned with luminous pearls, rare corals, and chests of sunken gold, which would be used to adorn the interior of the great temple. A third group, the legends say, served as miners and smiths. They delved deep into the earth, bringing forth vast quantities of copper and gold. This ore was then forged by Djinn smiths into the great vessels of the temple, the mighty pillars, and the intricate decorations that lined its halls. The entire supply chain of the project, from the deepest mine to the highest battlement, was powered by these bound spirits. The most rebellious among the Djinn, the Cheyenne, were given the most arduous and demeaning tasks. The legends describe them bound in chains, their arrogance and fiery pride broken against the divinely ordained will of the prophet king. Their enslavement was a constant visible reminder of the consequence of defying God's authority. Through this coerced labor, the temple was said to have been completed with miraculous speed and splendor. It was a structure that defied all known laws of engineering, a building whose very existence was a testament to Solomon's unique dominion. In these legends, human hands may have finished the work, but the foundations and the glory were built by the people of fire. The completed temple of the legends was therefore a powerful jewel symbol. It was a house of prayer, a place of light dedicated to the worship of the one true God. It was also a monument to the perfect subjugation of the forces of the unseen, a demonstration that even the most proud and powerful of the Djinn were subject to divine law, made manifest through the will of a single pious human king. Solomon's dominion in these later legends required more than just forced labor. It required a system for neutralizing the most powerful and mutinous spirits who refused to be broken. These were the princes of the Djinn, the mighty Efrit, whose pride was as vast as their power, and whose fiery nature made them an active threat to the order of his kingdom. The Ifrit of the folklore were the proudest of the fire spirits. They saw their subjugation as an intolerable humiliation. They resisted, they sabotaged the work, and they openly defied the commands of the prophet king. Their continued rebellion posed a direct threat, a source of chaos that could not be allowed to fester within Solomon's perfectly ordered realm. For these beings, the storytellers of the Golden Age imagined a more permanent solution. This is the origin of the iconic legend of the bottled Djinn. The punishment was designed to match the scale of their arrogance, an eternal sentence of isolation and powerlessness, a theme that resonated deeply with audiences of the time. The legends described the method in vivid detail. Solomon commanded his loyal Djinn to construct vessels of brass and copper. When a rebellious Ifrit was captured and brought before him, he would conjure the spirit into the vessel. The opening would then be sealed with a cap of lead, upon which was stamped the ultimate symbol of his authority, the great seal of Solomon, bearing the most great name of God. The power of this seal in the legends was absolute. The divine name inscribed upon it was anathema to the rebellious spirits. It was a lock that their own supernatural power could never break. The vast cosmic energy of the Efrit was now contained within a small mundane prison. its rage and power perfectly sealed away from the world. This famous folkloric motif has even deeper roots. An earlier precursor to this theme can be found in the Testament of Solomon, a pseudo-epigraphical text from the first few centuries of the Common Era. In that text, Solomon is described as trapping demons not in brass bottles, but in leather, bags, and water vessels, showing the long evolution of this legendary theme. Once an Ifrit was imprisoned, the legends say the vessel was removed from Solomon's kingdom entirely. The bottles were cast into the depths of the sea or buried in the heart of the deep desert. They were scattered, becoming lost relics of a bygone age. The sleeping antagonists of 1,000 future stories waiting to be found and foolishly opened. The instrument of that final legendary victory, the seal that locked away the chaos of the Djinn, became a legend in its own right. Like the story of the bottled spirits, the detailed folklore of the Seal of Solomon is a post-Quranic development, a powerful symbol that grew in complexity and significance during the medieval era. These later traditions held that Solomon's power was contained within a magnificent signet ring given to him by angels. This ring was the conduit for his miracles, the tool through which he commanded the winds, the animals, and the Djinn. In the world of folklore, to possess the ring was to possess the keys to the kingdom, both seen and unseen. The iconic visual for this seal, the six-pointed hexog, arose from medieval Arab tradition. This powerful symbol, with its interlocking triangles, was interpreted by mystics as a sign of perfect cosmic balance. One triangle represents humanity reaching up from the earth. The other represents the divine reaching down from the heavens. The seal is a symbol of the perfect union between the spiritual and material worlds. At the heart of the seal, as the legends tell it, was the Ism al-Azam, the most great name of God. This was the true source of its power. It was the utterance of this name that forced the Djinn to obey, that bound the Ifrit, and that made the seal an unbreakable lock. The ring itself was merely a vessel for a power that was infinitely greater. The folklore surrounding the ring also contains a crucial cautionary tale. One story tells of how a rebellious Djinn, a shaitan, managed to steal the ring from Solomon. For a time, the demon assumed Solomon's form and ruled his kingdom, causing chaos and injustice. This story served as a powerful reminder that the power was a sacred trust, and that even a prophet could be vulnerable if his vigilance lapsed. Ultimately, in the legends, Solomon recovers his ring and restores his kingdom. But upon his death, the unique divine gift was rescinded just as the Quranic prayer had requested. The ring, according to folklore, was lost to the world, its power returning to its divine source. The age of miracles, of a human openly commanding the Djinn with God's blessing, was over. The Seal of Solomon, however, endured as a potent symbol. It became a fixture in the arts, the architecture, and the mystical traditions of the Islamic world. It was engraved onto swords for protection, woven into talismans to ward off evil, and placed on buildings as a sign of divine favor. The ring of the legend was lost, but its legacy became a permanent part of the human struggle to find order and protection in a world still haunted by the unseen. With the age of Solomon's direct control now a distant legend, the Djinn were once again a free and untamed force in the world. It was in the folklore and scholarship of the Islamic Golden Age that a detailed bestiary of the unseen world began to take shape. It is crucial to state that this elaborate taxonomy, this classification of spirits, is a product of these later traditions. It is not laid out in the Quran itself, but represents a vibrant effort by storytellers and scholars to categorize the vast and terrifying diversity of the people of fire. At the very top of this folkloric hierarchy, the most powerful and the most ancient of their kind are the married. The word itself comes from an Arabic root meaning rebellious or disobedient. The married is the archetypal embodiment of immense power fused with supreme arrogance. They are the princes of the Djinn, vast ancient beings who view humanity with a mixture of contempt and mild curiosity. Marids are traditionally associated with the open spaces of the world, the deep oceans, and the high heavens. They are described as colossal in size, capable of altering the weather and of performing the most incredible feats of magic. They are the beings who became the template for the Western genie, for it is the married who is most often associated with the act of granting wishes, an act they perform with a capricious and often dangerous will. The most famous depiction of a married in all of literature is the one found in the tale of the fisherman and the genie. In this story, a poor fisherman hauls up a brass bottle in his nets, a bottle sealed with the very seal of Solomon. When he opens it, he releases a married who was imprisoned by the prophet king thousands of years before. The married is so vast that its head touches the clouds, and its first instinct is one of vengeance. The story perfectly illustrates the Marid's core traits. After its initial rage, the Marid engages in a long, intelligent conversation with the fisherman. It is immensely proud, detailing its own power and the oath it took to kill the one who freed it. It is also bound by its word, a prisoner of its own sworn oaths. It is a being of immense power, but that power is channeled through a rigid and arrogant personality. This arrogance is the Marid's defining vulnerability. The fisherman, realizing he cannot possibly fight the creature, uses cunning to defeat it. He questions how a being so vast could possibly fit into a bottle so small. The married, its pride, wounded, scoffs at the fisherman's ignorance and to prove its power, transforms itself back into smoke and funnels itself back into the bottle. The fisherman quickly replaces the seal, trapping the ancient prince of the Djinn once more. This tale is the perfect encapsulation of the married. They are a force of nature, a being of near limitless power who can only be defeated through an appeal to their own colossal ego. They are the ultimate test of human wit against supernatural might. The arrogant blue-bee bloodoods of the unseen world, whose pride is both the source of their terror and the key to their defeat. Where the Marid represents the arrogance of the heavens, and the sea, the next class of Djinn embodies the raw, destructive power of the Earth's fiery core. This is the domain of the Ifrit. The term's evolution is a perfect example of how this taxonomy was formed. The word first appears in the Quran not as a distinct species, but as an epithet, an adjective. In the court of Solomon, one of the spirits boasts of his strength, and he is called an Ifrit from the Djinn, meaning a powerful or rebellious one. It was in the later folklore of the Golden Age that this adjective evolved into a proper noun. Ifrit became the name for a specific class of chthonic, fiery, and malevolent Djinn. They are the demonic soldiers and guardians of treasure, beings of immense power defined by a core of inherent malice and a love of destruction. Their personalities are a reflection of their smoldering bodies, prone to explosive rage and a cruel, cunning intelligence. In folklore, they are often depicted, dwelling in subterranean kingdoms, ancient ruins, and forgotten tombs. They are the archetypal guardians of treasure, hoarding ancient wealth, not out of greed, but out of a possessive territorial malice. They are the powerful servants summoned by sorcerers for the most difficult and violent of tasks. This combination of immense power and rebellious pride made the Ifrit the most problematic of King Solomon's servants in the later legends. It was the Ifrit who chafed most under his rule. It was they who were bound in chains and forced into the hardest labor during the building of the temple. And it was the Ifrit who were the primary candidates for imprisonment within the sealed brass vessels. The Ifrit, therefore, is the soldier, the enforcer, and the assassin of the Djinn world. They are a weapon of raw elemental force, their fiery bodies matched only by their smoldering tempers. Where a Marid might be reasoned with through an appeal to its ego, an Ifrit understands only the language of power, domination, and overwhelming force. Where the Ifrit embodies a physical and elemental malice, Our next class of jinn represents a more insidious, ideological evil. These are the shaitan, the devils. While the original shaitan is Las himself, the term also encompasses all of the jinn, who chose to follow his rebellion and dedicate themselves to his mission of leading humanity astray. The shaitan are a class of jinn defined by their ideological commitment to the cause of Las, acting as agents of temptation and corruption. Their primary weapon is the one he first perfected in the Garden of Eden, the whisper or waswasa. They are the masters of psychological warfare, the unseen tempters who sow the seeds of doubt, envy, and despair in the human heart. Their entire purpose is to sever the bond between a human and God. In Islamic tradition, they are a constant, active presence. A shaitan is assigned to every human being from birth, a dark counterpart to the guardian angels. This personal tempter studies its human charge, learning their specific weaknesses and tailoring its whispers to be maximally effective. They delight in disrupting acts of piety. They are the source of distracting thoughts during prayer. The feeling of lethargy when one intends to do a good deed, and the voice of procrastination that says, "Do it tomorrow." They work on the margins of human consciousness, their influence so subtle that the person often believes the corrupting thought is their own. The shaitan are also the patrons of forbidden knowledge and destructive acts. It is they who, according to the Quran, taught sorcery to mankind, a dark art that creates the illusion of power, but leads only to ruin. They inspire division within communities, turning friends into enemies and spreading gossip and slander to weaken social bonds. This makes the Shan a fundamentally different kind of threat from a married or an ifrit. A mard is a cosmic force to be outwitted. An ifrit is a physical monster to be overcome. A shaitan is a reflection of the darkness within the human soul itself. To fight a shaitan is to fight against one's own worst impulses, to engage in a constant battle for the purity of one's own intentions. Where the shaitan wages a subtle war for the human soul, our next subject wages a brutal physical war for the human body. This is the domain of the ghoul, the most monstrous and feared of all the lower jinn. The ghoul is a specific and terrifying class of lower jinn, a predatory entity driven by an insatiable hunger for human flesh. The ghoul is one of the most ancient figures in Arabian folklore, a pre-Islamic demon born from the traveler's fear of the deep desert. It is the ultimate predator of the wastelands, a being that preser. Its primary hunting grounds are the places most associated with death, lonely roads, abandoned ruins, and especially graveyards. The ghoul's primary weapon is its mastery of shape-shifting, which it uses for the purpose of luring its prey. The most common form it takes is that of a human woman, often a beautiful traveler who appears in distress on a remote road. She will attempt to lure a lone man away from his caravan, leading him to her lair, where she can reveal her true form and devour him. This predatory cunning is a key part of their terror. They are intelligent hunters who exploit human empathy and desire. They can mimic the voices of loved ones, create illusions of oases or settlements, and do anything necessary to isolate a victim before attacking. Their evil is a hungry, patient, and strategic evil. Their connection to graveyards is their most infamous trait. The ghoul is a carrion eater, an eater of the dead. They are said to dig up freshly buried corpses to feast on their flesh. This act of desecration made them a figure of ultimate defilement, a being that violates the final sanctity of the human body. In some traditions, the line between the jinn, ghoul, and the human ghoul begins to blur. It was believed that a human who practiced cannibalism or a sorcerer who dealt too deeply in necromancy could transform into a ghoul after their death. They would become a monstrous, undead creature, forever bound to the graveyards and forever cursed with a hunger for their own kind. Because of their physical predatory nature, the ghoul is also considered the most killable of the jinn. Early legends and hadith traditions speak of them being slain by a single decisive blow from a sword. However, it was said that if the first blow failed to kill it, the ghoul would mock its attacker, and a second blow would have no effect. This made any confrontation a terrifying all-or-nothing gamble. The ghoul, therefore, represents the bottom of the Djinn hierarchy. It is a creature of base physical appetites. It lacks the cosmic arrogance of the married, the fiery pride of the Ephraim, and the ideological malice of the Shaitan. It is instead a pure monster, a supernatural predator whose only goal is to lure, to kill, and to consume. Beyond the great princes, the fiery soldiers, and the flesh-eating monsters, there lies the vast, teeming population of the Djinn world. These are the common folk, the lesser tribes who make up the bulk of the unseen nation. Medieval Arab scholars and encyclopedists, in their drive to classify the world, also gave names to these more mundane spirits. The most common and widespread of these are the Djinn. The Djinn are a class of Djinn often depicted as the most populous and the least powerful, representing the common folk of the unseen nation. They are the desert dwellers, the haunters of oases, and the spirits most likely to be encountered by a traveler in the wilderness. In their disposition, the Djinn are considered the most similar to humanity. They are a mercurial and relatively primitive class of Djinn. They can be friendly and helpful to a human who shows them respect, but they are also quick to anger and can be mischievous or harmful if offended. Their morality is often tribal and personal rather than grandly cosmic like the Shaitan. The Djinn are also the masters of shape-shifting among the lesser Djinn. They are most often associated with the ability to take the form of desert animals like snakes, lizards, or whirlwinds of dust. It is their presence that populates the vast emptiness of the desert, giving a name and a face to the strange sounds and sights of the waste. Even more elusive and ancient than the Djinn are the Jinn. Pre-Islamic law often describes the Jinn as a race of lesser spirits who inhabited the world before the creation of the Djinn. They are closer to the animal kingdom, spirits of the wild places, who live alongside beasts. They are shy, reclusive, and rarely interact with either Djinn or humanity, and so the taxonomy of the unseen world is complete. It is a vast and complex hierarchy, a great chain of being that mirrors the complexity of our own world. From the godlike arrogance of the married to the fiery malice of the Ephraim, the ideological evil of the Shaitan, the monstrous hunger of the ghoul, and the common teeming tribes of the Djinn, the unseen world is a complete ecosystem populated by a vast and terrifyingly diverse array of life. Having met the diverse and often terrifying inhabitants of the unseen world, a new question arises. How has humanity attempted to harness their power? Beyond the singular miracle of Solomon, there exists a darker path, a method of commanding, the Djinn that is born from rebellion and paid for with the human soul. This is the practice of Si, a word that translates to sorcery or black magic. Islamic theology classifies sorcery, seher, as an act of profound disbelief or kufur. It is placed among the gravest of all sins, a direct assault on the foundations of faith. To practice Sihr is to willingly step outside the bounds of divine law and to seek power from a forbidden, unholy source. The core theological violation of Sihr is the act of seeking aid from a created being to achieve something that should only be sought from the Creator. The sorcerer, in his desire for power, for knowledge, or for vengeance, turns his back on God. He chooses to petition a Djinn, effectively treating the spirit as a deity, a partner who can grant his requests. This act of petition is by its very nature a pact with the forces of rebellion. The Quran is clear that the teaching of sorcery is the work of the Shaitan. It was they who first taught this forbidden art to humanity as a great trial, a temptation that offers the illusion of worldly power at the price of spiritual ruin. Therefore, any Djinn who willingly responds to a sorcerer's call and agrees to serve him is by definition a corrupt and malevolent being. They are the Cheyenne, the followers of Los. The price they demand for their service is an act of blasphemy from the sorcerer, an act that proves his loyalty to their cause and forever severs his connection to the divine. The great prohibition against sorcery is therefore a fundamental boundary, a line drawn to protect the very essence of monotheism. It is a declaration that all true power belongs to God, and that any attempt to usurp that power by making a pact with his rebellious creatures is an act of treason against the cosmic order. A treason that invites damnation for the human and temporary, triumph for the Djinn. Forging that treasonous pact requires a deliberate and horrifying inversion of piety. The sorcerer who wishes to command a shaitan must first prove his worthiness, or rather his unworthiness, to the cause of rebellion. He must demonstrate through his actions that he has utterly rejected the sacred and embraced the profane. The initial act of summoning requires the sorcerer to deliberately perform acts of ritual impurity and blasphemy, signaling a complete rejection of divine law. Occult traditions and the scholarly texts that condemn them describe these rituals in grim detail. The sorcerer must retreat to a place of filth and isolation, an abandoned ruin or a graveyard, places where the veil between the worlds is already thin. There, in the darkness, he performs a series of blasphemous acts designed to attract the attention of the most corrupt Djinn. The most common and potent of these acts is the desecration of a holy text. The sorcerer might wear pages of the Quran on his feet, or use blood and other impure substances to write magical talismans upon its verses. These acts are a declaration of war against God, an invitation to his enemies. The sorcerer will then perform a ritual sacrifice to the Djinn he wishes to summon. He will slaughter an animal, often one of a specific color, without uttering the name of God, as is required for illicit sacrifice. Instead, he will dedicate the animal's life to the name of a great Djinn, or to Las himself. This offering of blood seals the initial contract. Once these conditions are met, the shaitan will manifest before the sorcerer. This initial appearance is a test of courage. The Djinn will often appear in a terrifying, monstrous form to gauge the magician's resolve. Only if the sorcerer stands his ground will the negotiation begin. The pact that is then forged is a strict and binding contract. The Djinn will agree to serve the sorcerer to provide him with information to carry him through the air or to harm his enemies. In exchange, the sorcerer pledges his eternal loyalty to the Djinn and its master. He agrees to a life of continued blasphemy and disbelief. This moment of summoning is the sorcerer's point of no return. He has willingly traded his faith for power, his soul for a servant. The Djinn he has summoned is not a mindless slave, but a cunning and ancient intelligence that holds him in utter contempt. The sorcerer believes he has gained a master key to the world. But in reality, he has just handed the key to his own damnation to his most bitter enemy. With the contract sealed, the sorcerer gains access to a sliver of the Djinn's power. But he is now forever bound to his demonic patron. He must continue to perform acts of blasphemy and sacrifice to keep the Djinn satisfied. The price of his power is a lifetime of servitude to the very forces he sought to command. A perfect and ironic inversion of his original ambition. The power the sorcerer gains from this pact is the power of deception. The Djinn, being creatures of smokeless fire, have no ability to create something from nothing. For creation is an attribute of God alone. Instead, their magic is a mastery of illusion, of manipulation, and of influencing the minds and bodies of men in ways that appear miraculous. The most common form of Djinn rote magic is the creation of powerful illusions, a practice known as takhayul. This is the magic described in the Quranic story of Moses and the Pharaoh's magicians. The Djinn at the sorcerer's command can affect the sight of onlookers, making an inanimate object like a rope or a staff appear to be a living, writhing serpent. The object itself does not change, but the perception of it does. This power can be used to create visions of terror, to make a person see things that are not there, or to glamour an object, making a worthless stone appear as a priceless gem. It is a magic that preys on the weaknesses of the human senses, a form of supernatural trickery that builds the sorcerer a reputation based on spectacular falsehoods. The second major category of seir is the magic of division. This is considered one of the most wicked forms of the art. At the sorcerer's request, a Djinn will work to sow discord and hatred between two people. They will whisper poisonous thoughts into the ear of a husband and wife, creating suspicion and paranoia until their love turns to revulsion and their marriage is destroyed. A third type of magic involves a direct physical influence. A sorcerer can command his Djinn to attack an enemy, causing them to suffer from unexplainable illnesses, persistent lethargy, or sharp stabbing pains that have no physical cause. This is a form of magical assault, using the unseen servant as a weapon to torment and weaken a victim from a distance. The Djinn can also serve as a supernatural spy. The sorcerer can dispatch his familiar to eavesdrop on the conversations of his enemies, to discover hidden secrets, or to find lost objects. The Djinn, with its ability to travel instantly and pass through solid walls, becomes the perfect agent of espionage, bringing back knowledge that would be impossible for a human to acquire. All of these powers, the power of illusion, of division, of affliction, and of espionage, serve a single unified purpose. They give the sorcerer a tangible advantage in the worldly affairs of men. They allow him to manipulate his rivals to gain wealth through deception and to build a fearsome reputation. It is the promise of this worldly power that lures him into the pact, blinding him to the catastrophic price he has already agreed to pay. The worldly advantages gained through sorcery are a poisoned chalice, a temporary victory that masks a permanent and catastrophic defeat. For the entire system of sire is a grand deception, a trap laid by the shaitan to ensnare the most arrogant and impatient of souls. The ultimate price of the pact is the sorcerer's faith, his iman, the very thing that gives his existence meaning. The sorcerer's pact represents a complete inversion of the proper relationship between a supplicant and a higher power, leading to a state of spiritual bondage. In illicit prayer, the human supplicant is honored by their submission to God. In the infernal pact, the Djinn holds the human sorcerer in utter contempt for his blasphemy. The sorcerer seeks to be a master, but in the eyes of the Djinn, he is the lowest and most pathetic of slaves. This spiritual degradation manifests as a slow erosion of the sorcerer's humanity. The constant performance of blasphemous rituals, the reliance on deception, and the companionship of a malevolent spirit all work to corrupt his soul. He becomes paranoid, cruel, and isolated, his heartening until he is incapable of feeling true peace or repentance. He is trapped in a prison of his own making. Classical Islamic theologians are clear on the final destination of the unrepentant sorcerer. The Quran states that the sorcerer will have no share in the hereafter. His act of willingly associating partners with God, of seeking power from a rebellious creation, is a sin so profound that it nullifies all his good deeds and seals his fate. The temporary power he wielded on earth is exchanged for eternal punishment. This final outcome is the Shaitan's ultimate victory. It is the entire purpose of the Great Deception. Las's original vow was to prove humanity unworthy of their honored station, and the sorcerer is his star witness. The sorcerer is the man who was given the honor of stewardship, the gift of free will, and access to divine guidance, and chose to trade it all for a handful of magical tricks. The Djinn's perspective on the pact is one of pure cynical triumph. It has used the sorcerer's own greed and arrogance to lead him to his own destruction. In the end, the master becomes the slave. The commander becomes the condemned. The power the sorcerer borrowed for a few short years is reclaimed, and the debt is paid with his eternal soul. And so the story of the sorcerer is the darkest of all. Cautionary tales. It is a stark warning that the shortcuts to power are always a trap. It reinforces the idea that the unseen world is governed by strict moral laws, and that the attempt to subvert these laws through a pact with the forces of rebellion is an act of cosmic folly, an act that ends with the total and irreversible annihilation of the self. Where the sorcerer willingly seeks out the Djinn to become a master, the victim of possession endures the opposite fate. They are unwillingly sought out by a Djinn and made into a slave. This phenomenon, the indwelling of a spirit within, a human body, is one of the most terrifying and complex subjects in Islamic theology, and it is governed by a clear theological framework. The orthodox scholarly consensus built upon the Quran and the traditions of the Prophet affirms the reality of Djinn possession. The act of possession is a transgression against a divinely established boundary, an unlawful occupation of a form that was not intended for the Djinn. In the language of Islamic jurisprudence, it is defined as an act of zul, a profound oppression or injustice committed by the spirit against the human. The theological mechanics of this invasion are rooted in the Djinn's elemental nature. Being creatures of a subtle, smokeless fire, they are composed of a finer, more ethereal substance than humans. This allows them, under certain circumstances, to enter and move through the denser body of clay. Much like air can move through a porous object, they are said to travel through the bloodstream of their victim. This indwelling gives the Djinn a degree of control over the human host. The spirit can access the person's senses, speak with their tongue, and control their limbs. This explains the classic signs of possession: the victim speaking in foreign languages they have never learned, possessing knowledge of hidden things, or exhibiting strength far beyond their natural capacity. Great scholars of the classical period, like the 13th century theologian Ibn Taymiyyah, studied this phenomenon in great detail. They affirmed that this is a real physical event. Their work was an attempt to understand the phenomenon through the lens of Scripture, to separate the reality of possession from mere superstition, and to establish a clear framework for both its diagnosis and its cure. This scholarly framework is crucial because it establishes possession as an unlawful act. The Djinn has no inherent right to occupy a human body. Its presence is a trespass, and therefore the victim is seen as being afflicted by a spiritual malady. They are a patient in need of treatment, a victim in need of rescue. This perspective reframes the entire phenomenon. The possessed person is not inherently evil, nor are they a willing partner in the Djinn's actions. They are the captive, the occupied territory in a spiritual war. This theological understanding is the absolute foundation for the practice of Islamic exorcism, as it establishes the ritual not as a battle against the human, but as a battle for the human. The unlawful act of possession is a profound transgression, and Islamic demonology has categorized the primary motives that drive a Djinn to commit such a crime. These motives are deeply and often tragically human. They are rooted in the primal emotions of revenge, of love, and of simple opportunistic malice. The most common motive for Djinn possession is revenge for a perceived harm, often one that was inflicted accidentally by the human. As we have seen, a person can unknowingly injure a Djinn or its family by throwing a rock, urinating in a hole in the ground, or pouring hot water onto the earth. The Djinn, unable to comprehend that the human was blind to its presence, perceives this act as a malicious and unprovoked attack on its kin. In this scenario, the possession is a misplaced act of justice. The Djinn, or a member of its tribe, will enter the body of the offender to exact a punishment. During the ritual of exorcism, the possessing spirit will often speak through the victim, explaining the crime that was committed against it and justifying its occupation of the body as a righteous act of retribution. A second, and perhaps more, tragic motive is love or desire. A Djinn can become infatuated with a human, developing a deep and obsessive love for them. In these cases, the Djinn will possess the human's body to prevent them from marrying or from having intimate relations with anyone else. It is a possessive, jealous love, a supernatural form of stalking that seeks to isolate and control the object of its affection. This type of possession can be particularly complex. The lover, Djinn or Ashik, often has no desire to harm its human host. It may even try to protect them from other threats. Yet its very presence is an unlawful act that causes spiritual and often physical sickness, trapping the human in a state of unwanted supernatural bondage. The third category of motive is simple opportunistic malice. This is the work of the Shayan, the unbelieving and corrupt Djinn who act as the foot soldiers of loss. These spirits require no reason to attack. They possess humans simply because they are vulnerable, as an act of pure wickedness, and as a fulfillment of their master's pledge to lead humanity to ruin. These malevolent Djinn will often seek out a person during moments of extreme emotional weakness, in a state of intense anger, profound grief, deep depression, or abject fear. In these moments, the spiritual defenses of a person are considered to be at their lowest, creating an opening, a doorway through which the opportunistic spirit can enter. A fourth and more direct cause of possession is sorcery. A sorcerer, as part of their pact, can command their bound Djinn to possess a specific victim. In this case, the Djinn is not acting on its own initiative, but as a weapon, a supernatural missile directed by the will of its human master. The possession is a targeted attack, the grim fulfillment of a magical contract. Understanding these motives, revenge, love, malice, and magic is the primary diagnostic tool of the exorcist. By identifying why the Djinn has possessed the victim, the practitioner can tailor the treatment, address the spirit's grievance, and begin the difficult process of convincing or compelling the unlawful occupant to leave its human vessel. Before the motive can be determined, the presence of an afflicting spirit must first be diagnosed. Classical Islamic scholarship and the manuals of exorcists describe a clear and consistent symptomatology of possession. These signs are the observable evidence of the unlawful occupation, the physical and psychological ripples caused by a being of fire inhabiting a body of clay. The most definitive and widely cited sign is a powerful aversion to the sacred. The possessed individual will often react with extreme negativity to the sound of the Quran being recited or to the adhan, the call to prayer. This reaction can range from a deep sense of unease and a desire to flee to fits of violent rage, convulsions, or uncontrollable weeping. The divine word is painful to the corrupting entity within. This is often accompanied by dramatic and sudden personality shifts. A normally calm and pious person may become reclusive, aggressive, and prone to using foul language. Their eyes might take on a strange, unsettling stare, and their voice may change in pitch and tone. Family members will report that the person before them is a stranger, an imposter in a familiar shell. The physical manifestations can be equally dramatic. The afflicted may suffer from seizures or fits that resemble epilepsy, yet have no discernible medical cause. During these episodes, they may exhibit a level of physical strength that is far beyond their normal capacity, requiring several people to restrain them. This is seen as the raw, fiery energy of the Djinn surging through the human vessel. The possession often manifests verbally. The victim may begin speaking in languages they have never learned, a phenomenon known as xenoglossy. At other times, the Djinn itself will speak through the person's mouth, revealing its own name, its motive for the possession, and knowledge of hidden events that the human host could not possibly know. This is often a key moment in the diagnostic process. The affliction frequently attacks the victim during sleep. They will be plagued by terrifying, recurring nightmares, often involving being chased by black dogs or snakes. Many also report experiencing a crushing weight on their chest, a state of waking paralysis where they are conscious and terrified but unable to move or scream. This condition, known in folklore as aljath, is widely considered to be a direct physical assault by a Djinn. Subtler physical signs also appear. The afflicted may complain of a constant shifting pain in their body that doctors cannot explain. They may also discover strange unexplained bruises, scratches, or marks on their skin upon waking as if they were physically handled during the night. These signs are viewed as the marks left by the spirit's unseen presence. Together, these symptoms form a diagnostic profile. They are a checklist of spiritual and physical ailments that allow the family of the afflicted and the exorcist they call upon to distinguish a case of genuine possession from one of simple melancholy or physical illness. The presence of multiple, persistent signs is the signal that a battle must be fought, a battle to reclaim the body from its unlawful invader. The traditional diagnostic profile of possession presents a profound intellectual challenge. Many of the signs, convulsions, personality shifts, auditory hallucinations, and paranoia are also recognized by modern medicine as the symptoms of established neurological and psychological conditions such as epilepsy, schizophrenia, or severe depression. This creates a complex and often contentious area of overlap. The traditional framework of possession and the modern understanding of mental illness represent two distinct explanatory models for understanding profound human suffering. One model attributes the cause to an external supernatural agent. The other attributes it to internal biological and psychological processes. Classical Islamic civilization itself recognized this complexity. The great physicians of the Golden Age, like Ibn Sina, were aware of conditions like melancholy and mania. They developed sophisticated theories of medicine based on the balance of the humors and the health of the brain. A wise practitioner in that era would often have to determine if a patient's affliction required a physician to heal the body or an exorcist to heal the soul. The traditional theological view accommodates this complexity. It posits that the Djinn are opportunistic predators. Just as a physical injury can allow a bacterium to infect the body, a pre-existing mental or emotional vulnerability can create an opening for a Djinn to enter and amplify the suffering. A person suffering from deep depression, for example, is seen as being more susceptible to the whispers of a shaitan that encourages despair. In the modern context, this issue remains a subject of intense debate and requires profound cultural sensitivity. For many believers around the world, Djinn possession is a lived reality that provides a vital framework for understanding and confronting suffering. A diagnosis of possession can for some be a source of comfort as it externalizes the illness and provides a clear faith-based path towards a cure. The great challenge for families, communities, and healers is one of discernment. It is the difficult task of determining where the boundaries lie between the spiritual and the psychological. It is the need to ensure that individuals receive appropriate medical care for diagnosable conditions while also respecting the profound role that faith and spiritual healing can play in a person's journey towards well-being. This ambiguity is perhaps the final and most unsettling aspect of the Djinn's influence. They are creatures of the unseen, their world hidden behind a veil. It is only logical that their impact on our world would be equally mysterious. A phenomenon that resides in the deep and often murky waters where the health of the body, the clarity of the mind, and the purity of the soul all converge. And it is for those who believe they are afflicted by the latter that a specific and ancient remedy exists. A form of spiritual combat designed to drive the invader from the vessel and restore the soul to its rightful owner. This is the practice of Ruqya, the Islamic rite of exorcism for the affliction of possession. Islamic tradition prescribes a specific and powerful form of spiritual healing. The practice of Islamic exorcism or Ruqya is fundamentally a healing, rite centered on the power of God's word to restore order to a person's soul. It is a direct confrontation with the occupying entity, a battle fought for the liberation of the human vessel. The practice is rooted in the traditions of the Prophet Muhammad himself, who both performed Ruqya on others and taught his companions the specific Quranic verses and supplications to use. This establishes the practice as a divinely sanctioned form of medicine for the soul, a legitimate and necessary response to a genuine spiritual ailment. The practitioner of Ruqya, known as a Raqi, is ideally a person of deep piety, knowledge, and strong faith. Their authority comes directly from God, and their only weapon is the divine word. The Raki is a spiritual physician, and their first task is diagnostic. They must confirm that the affliction is indeed possession and attempt to identify the type and motive of the Djinn involved. The core principle of Ruqya is the establishment of a clear theological hierarchy. The Raki begins the session by reminding all present, the patient, their family, and the unseen spirit of the absolute power and dominion of God over all creation. The central argument made to the Djinn is that its occupation of the human is an act of injustice, a transgression against the laws of God, to whom they too are subject. This transforms the exorcism from a chaotic brawl into a divine courtroom. The Raki is the prosecutor presenting God's law as the evidence. The Djinn is the defendant accused of the crime of trespass and oppression, and the goal is to convince the Djinn to repent of its crime and leave the body peacefully, restoring justice to the victim. Music. The primary weapon in the battle for the soul is the Quran itself. The recitation of specific Quranic verses functions as a direct spiritual assault on the possessing entity, its divine truth acting as a painful and disruptive force to the creature of fire. Each verse is a reminder of God's power, a truth that is intolerable to a creature in a state of rebellion. The Raki will begin by reciting verses that affirm the oneness and omnipotence of God. These verses are a direct challenge to the arrogance of the Djinn, a declaration that its power is finite and derived. The most powerful of these is Ayati, the verse of the throne, a passage that describes God's absolute dominion over the heavens and the earth, a truth that is said to physically burn the shaitan. Next, the Raki will recite verses that specifically mention the Djinn and their creation from fire. This includes the story of Las's rebellion and his fall from grace. This act is a form of psychological warfare, reminding the possessing Djinn of its own kind's ultimate defeat and the futility of its rebellion. It is a reminder of its place in the cosmic order. Verses that condemn sorcery and nullify its effects are also a crucial part of the arsenal. If the possession is the result of a magical contract, these verses are believed to act as a divine counterspell. Their recitation directly attacks the pact made between the sorcerer and the Djinn, weakening the magical bonds that compel the spirit to remain in the victim's body. The final chapters of the Quran, known as Al-Mu'aw with a Tain, are the verses of seeking refuge. These are recited to protect both the patient and the healer from the evil of the Djinn, and to create a fortress of divine protection around the session. Their recitation is a shield warding off the desperate final attacks of the cornered spirit. The effect of this recitation on the possessed is often immediate and dramatic. The Djinn speaking through the victim will cry out in pain, begging the Raki to stop. It may try to bargain, to lie, or to make threats. The Raki's role is to remain firm, to continue the recitation, and to increase the pressure of the divine word until the Djinn's will to remain is broken and it is finally forced to exit the body. Music. The application of these powerful verses is embedded within a structured and methodical ritual. The Ruqya ritual is a multi-stage process combining Quranic recitation with direct commands and symbolic actions to cleanse the patient and expel the occupying spirit. The session begins with preparation, both of the space and of the tools. The space is cleansed of any images or objects that might be considered idolatrous, creating a spiritually pure environment. The Raki will often then prepare a bowl of water. He will recite the potent verses of the Quran directly over the water with the intention that the divine blessing, the barakah of the words, will infuse the water itself, transforming it into a tool for healing and a weapon against the Djinn. The session with the patient begins with the Raki placing a hand on their head, establishing a physical and spiritual connection. He then begins the recitation, speaking the verses clearly and authoritatively directly into the patient's ear. This is the initial assault, the primary application of the divine word designed to weaken the Djinn and force it to manifest. Once the Djinn begins to react, often speaking through the patient, the Raki transitions from recitation to direct confrontation. He will command the Djinn in the name of God to exit the body. He will interrogate it about its name, its religion, and its motive for the possession. If the Djinn is a Muslim who has committed a transgression, the Raki will preach to it, calling it to repent and to cease its oppression. During the confrontation, the blessed water is used. The patient is given some of the water to drink, and the rest is sprinkled over their face and body. The water infused with the power of the Quran is believed to burn the Djinn internally and weaken its hold on the vessel. The Raki may also use blessed oil, anointing the parts of the patient's body where they feel pain. The final stage is the expulsion. After a prolonged period of recitation and commands, the weakened Djinn is ordered to exit. The Raki will command it to leave through the extremities, such as the fingers or the toes, to minimize harm to the patient. The exit is often accompanied by a final convulsion or a shout from the patient, followed by a state of profound calm and exhaustion, as the body is finally freed from its spiritual burden. For 1,000 years, the story of the Djinn unfolded within the theological and cultural landscape of the Islamic world. But in the 18th and 19th centuries, that story was discovered by a new and powerful audience, the scholars, artists, and imperialists of Europe. The Djinn would now be seen through a new distorting lens, the lens of Orientalism. Orientalism was a European intellectual and artistic movement that sought to study and depict the cultures of the Orient, a term that vaguely encompassed North, Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. The Orientalist perspective framed the East as a monolithic entity, a place of exotic fantasy, timeless tradition, and inherent irrationality. It was seen as a world that was fundamentally alluring but also backwards and in need of Western interpretation and control. This framework was profoundly paternalistic. The European scholar or artist positioned himself as the expert, the one who could truly understand and explain the mysteries of the East to a Western audience. In doing so, he often stripped the subjects of their own context, their own intellectual traditions, and their own agency. The living, breathing cultures of the region were transformed into a collection of exotic objects and fascinating but ultimately primitive beliefs. When this lens was applied to the Djinn, the effect was dramatic. The complex theologically grounded being, the parallel creation with free will, the subject of divine judgment, was of little interest to the Orientalist. What fascinated him was the creature of folklore, the monstrous and magical genie of 1001 Nights. This selective focus on the fantastic had a profound consequence. The Orientalists cherry-picked the most sensational and magical elements from the folklore while ignoring the deep ethical and theological framework in which those stories were embedded. The Djinn were divorced from the Quran and the scholarly tradition that had defined them for a millennium. The result was a profound flattening of the concept. The vast and diverse taxonomy of the Djinn, the arrogant married, the fiery Efrit, the malevolent ghoul, was collapsed into a single generic entity, the genie. This new creature was defined almost exclusively by its relationship to a human master and its function as a granter of wishes. This process of reinterpretation was an act of intellectual colonization. It took a complex figure from a living, breathing culture and transformed it into a stock character in a Western fantasy. The Orientalist lamp did not just reveal the Djinn to a new audience. It trapped it, redefined it, and created a new, simplified image that would soon conquer the imagination of the entire world. The starting point for this global transformation was one man, the 18th century French scholar and diplomat, Antoine Galland. It was his translation of 1001 Nights titled Le Mille Août that first introduced the tales to a European audience. This publication was an immediate and sensational success, igniting a craze for Eastern stories across the continent. Galland's work was a masterpiece of adaptation. He took the raw and often unsettling tales of the original manuscripts and adapted, them to suit the refined literary tastes of the 18th century French court. He smoothed over the rough edges, emphasized the romance and the magic, and presented a version of the East that was enchanting, wondrous, and perfectly safe for a European. Drawing room. Most critically, Galland is the source for some of the collection's most famous tales, including Aladdin and the Wonderful Lamp. This story, with its two powerful and largely subservient genies, was not present in the older Arabic manuscripts Galland worked from. He heard it from a Syrian storyteller and added it to his collection, thereby creating the single most influential genie narrative in the Western world. From Galland, the genie leapt into the popular culture of the 19th and 20th centuries. The Victorian era, with its love of pantomime and spectacle, embraced Aladdin as a stage show. This further simplified the characters, turning the genie into a theatrical special effect, a benevolent giant who appeared in a puff of smoke to delight the audience. As Galland's published volumes of the Nights became more and more popular, public demand for new stories grew to a fever pitch. But Galland was running out of material from his manuscript. Then in 1709, a fellow scholar introduced him to a young Syrian storyteller who was visiting Paris, a man by the name of Hanna Diab. Diab was a master of the ancient oral tradition of the Hakawati, the coffeehouse storyteller. Over several sessions, he narrated a series of new, captivating tales for Galland, who dutifully wrote them down in his journal. Two of these stories were particularly magical. Aladdin's Wonderful Lamp and Alibaba and the 40 Thieves. This is a fact of monumental historical importance. The two most famous stories now associated with 1001 Nights, the tales that have defined the collection for the entire Western world, were not present in any known medieval Arabic manuscript. They were additions, oral tales from one Syrian storyteller transcribed in an 18th century Parisian diary. Galland, recognizing the immense appeal of these new stories, seamlessly integrated them into his French collection. He published them as if they were authentic parts of the original manuscript, satisfying the public's demand and cementing the tales in the literary canon. The world was captivated, entirely unaware that its new favorite Arabian Night was in fact a recent French acquisition. Once Galland's genie archetype was established, the popular culture of the 19th and 20th centuries began a long process of simplifying it even further. The Victorian era, with its love of pantomime and spectacle, embraced Aladdin as a recurring stage show. This adaptation stripped the story of its remaining exotic danger and remade the genie as a comedic family-friendly figure, a theatrical special effect in a puff of smoke. Early cinema continued this trend. Films like 1940's The Thief of Baghdad presented the genie as a giant, powerful, and visually impressive being, but one whose role was entirely functional. He was a plot device, a tool for creating spectacle and driving the hero's adventure. The last vestiges of a complex inner life or a dangerous will were almost entirely erased in favor of visual grandeur. This century-long journey of simplification reached its final and most globally dominant form in 1992 with the release of the Disney animated film Aladdin. The genie in this film is the ultimate culmination of the Western adaptation. He is powerful, but his power is used almost exclusively for comedic effect and pop culture references. He is a friend, a sidekick, a performer, and an anachronism. The Disney genie is the perfect symbol of the process. He is an entity completely divorced from any authentic cultural or theological origin. His defining characteristic is his desire for freedom, a freedom that only his human master can grant him. This is a profound inversion of the authentic Djinn's most fundamental trait, their own powerful and consequential free will. And so, the journey that began in an 18th century Parisian coffeehouse reached its logical conclusion. The authentic Syrian folktale once added to the Nights was itself remade. The powerful but subservient genie was further transformed into a beloved blue wisecracking cartoon character, a friendly and utterly domesticated monster perfectly remade in the image of its new global audience. The global success of this specific 18th century archetype created a permanent cultural schism. The genie, born from Hannah Diab's tale and popularized by Antoine Galland, became a cultural shorthand that now completely overshadows the authentic and far more complex figure of the Djinn. This has led to a profound and often frustrating cultural disconnect. For much of the Western world, the word genie now evokes an immediate and almost universal image: a friendly, powerful, and comedic servant from the story of Aladdin. This image is a product of a specific literary history, a fantasy figure designed for wish fulfillment and adventure. It is a being that is fundamentally safe, lovable, and fictional. For hundreds of millions of people in the Muslim world and its diaspora, the word jinn evokes something far more serious. It evokes a real theologically grounded being with a history, a society, and a capacity for both good and evil. It is a subject of serious scholarly debate, a factor in daily life, and a source of genuine spiritual concern as it has been for 1,400 years. This disconnect can lead to a trivialization of a deeply held belief system. When the dominant global image of a being from your faith is a cartoon character born from an 18th century translation, it can create a barrier to sincere dialogue. The profound anxieties about possession, the moral complexities of free will, and the respect for the unseen world can be difficult to discuss when the other party's only point of reference is a wisecracking sidekick. The legacy of Galland's translation is therefore a double-edged sword. It made the concept of the knights a permanent part of world literature. But in adding Aladdin, it created a distorted echo, a funhouse mirror reflection that is now more recognizable than the authentic figures from the original medieval texts. This creates a unique challenge for any modern exploration of the topic. The first step in understanding the authentic jinn is now the act of unlearning the fictional genie. It requires a deliberate effort to look past the lamp, to understand its true 18th century origin, and to confront the far more ancient, complex, and unsettling reality of the being made from smokeless fire. And that reality is far from a relic of the past. For in the 21st century, the belief in the Djinn is still a powerful and living force. It continues to evolve, to adapt to new technologies, and to provide a framework for understanding the unseen in a world that is more connected and perhaps more haunted than ever before. That process of adaptation to a connected world has found its ultimate expression in a new and powerful environment: the Internet. The digital landscape, with its anonymity, its instant communication, and its endless echoing corridors of information, has become the new desert. It is the new vast empty space where the human mind can once again encounter and create its own monsters. Music. The Internet functioned as a powerful catalyst, transforming the very structure and dissemination of Djinn folklore. The old oral tradition of the storyteller has been reborn in the form of the viral social media post, the creepypasta forum story, and the found footage video. These new formats allow the tales to spread with unprecedented speed, blurring the lines between fiction and supposed reality. Modern digital legends often fuse the ancient spirit with contemporary anxieties. One of the most popular of these is the story of the Karina, a type of Djinn from older folklore who is born as a spiritual double to every human. In online stories, this being is reimagined as a terrifying supernatural stalker, a doppelganger who appears in the background of photographs, who can be glimpsed in a webcam, or who mimics a person's online profile to torment them. These new stories function in the same way the old ones did. They give a supernatural explanation to a common and unsettling modern experience. The fear of being watched through our own devices, the anxiety of a stolen digital identity, or the uncanny feeling of a glitch in the matrix are all fertile ground for a belief in an unseen, mischievous, and sometimes malevolent entity. And so, the ancient spirits of the desert have successfully migrated into the digital ether. They have become the ghosts in the machine, the unseen presence in the static, and the monstrous face in the reflection of a dark screen. This proves that the core of the belief is not tied to a specific landscape or technology, but to a fundamental and enduring human need to give a name to the fears that haunt the empty spaces of our world. While the internet gave new life to the oral traditions of Djinn folklore, the modern film and television industry of the Middle East and Southeast Asia gave the Djinn a powerful new visual form. In these cultures where the belief in the Djinn remains a serious and widespread phenomenon, a new genre of horror cinema has emerged, presenting a stark and terrifying alternative to the Western genie. Contemporary horror cinema from the Muslim world treats the Djinn as a source of genuine, terrifying, and theologically grounded horror. These films function as a powerful cultural pushback against the sanitized Western portrayal. They are a reclamation of the Djinn in its most frightening and authentic form, a being of immense power, free will, and often profound malevolence. The Djinn of these films are the creatures of the old texts brought to life with modern special effects. They are the vengeful spirits who haunt a family for an accidental transgression. They are the ancient powerful entities bound to a sorcerer's will. And they are the demonic Cheyenne who possess the spiritually vulnerable. The plots of these films are often drawn directly from the classical frameworks of possession and black magic. These films use the Djinn to explore deep cultural and social anxieties. They tell stories of the conflict between tradition and modernity, between faith and skepticism. The Djinn often serves as a terrifying symbol of a repressed history or a forgotten moral law that has come back to haunt the modern secular world. Their appearance is a violent reminder that the old rules still apply. Visually, these films have created a new and terrifying language for the Djinn. They are often depicted as shadowy, fast-moving figures with glowing eyes and unnaturally contorted limbs. They are masters of the jump scare, appearing in reflections or moving with impossible speed. This new aesthetic combines the ancient law with the cinematic techniques of global horror, creating a monster that is both culturally specific and universally terrifying. The international success of films from franchises like Sigyn from Turkey or Dabi have introduced this authentic, terrifying vision of the Djinn to a global audience for the first time. For many Western viewers, these films are their first encounter with the Djinn as a figure of genuine dread. They are a powerful and necessary cultural corrective, a reminder that before the genie was a friend, it was a terror, and that in many parts of the world, it still is. From the digital ghosts of the internet to the monsters of the silver screen, the Djinn have proven to be remarkably resilient. In an age of scientific reason, of satellite imagery that has mapped every desert, and of psychological models that explain every aberration of the mind, the people of fire endure. Their survival raises a final fundamental question. Why? The belief in the Djinn endures because it provides a sophisticated and culturally resonant language for describing the unseen, forces that act upon the human psyche. It is a framework that gives a name and a narrative to the internal whisper of temptation, the cold weight of despair, and the sudden irrational impulse towards anger or self-destruction. It personifies the battle for the self. This framework offers a profound sense of agency to the believer. A struggle with depression or a fit of rage is a direct assault from an external adversary, the whisper of a shaitan. This transforms the sufferer from a passive victim of their own neurochemistry into an active soldier in a cosmic war. It is a battle that can be fought and won through the weapons of faith, of prayer, and of divine remembrance. And so the Djinn remain a living, breathing part of the human story. They are a testament to the enduring power of narrative to shape our reality, a proof that for millions the world is far more than what can be seen with the eye. It is a layered reality, a world of clay and of fire, of the seen and the unseen, locked in a timeless struggle for the human soul. Our journey to unmask the Djinn has been a journey through the very history of human belief. We began in the dust of the ancient world, in the primal fear of the unknown, and found the raw material of faith, the formless nature spirits of the unforgiving, desert. These were the proto-Djinn, the whispers in the waste. With the fire of revelation, these chaotic spirits were forged into something new, a coherent theological species. They were given a place in the cosmic order, a history defined by a great rebellion and a purpose as a parallel creation, a hidden nation whose story was now inextricably linked with our own. They were the people of the smokeless flame. In the age of wonders that followed, this theological being was transformed again, becoming the star of 1,000 fantastic tales. They were the builders of a prophet's legendary temple, the ancient, prisoners in brass bottles and the monstrous guardians of forbidden knowledge. They were the engines of folklore, their power a catalyst for the greatest adventures the world has ever known. And in the modern age, the Djinn was transformed again, its identity fractured. It became the harmless, friendly servant of Western fantasy, born from an 18th century literary event, and it became the terrifying demonic monster of global horror. The story of the Djinn is a story of continuous transformation, an entity that has worn many masks across the millennia. Yet beneath every one of these masks, from the desert god to the cartoon genie, the core function of the Djinn remains the same. It is a vessel for our greatest fears and our most profound hopes. It is the name we give to the unseen forces that shape our lives, the whisper of temptation in our ear, and the dream of a power that could change our world in an instant. The people of fire have always served as a dark reflection of the people of clay. Their pride is our pride. Their capacity for faith is our capacity for faith. Their internal battle between good and evil is the same battle that rages in every human heart. Their story is our story written in a language of fire and shadow. To unmask the Djinn is in the end to unmask ourselves. It is to confront the terrifying and beautiful truth that we are not alone in the cosmos, that we are beings of profound moral choice, sharing a world with unseen forces, and that the great timeless struggle between the light and the darkness is waged not only in the heavens or in the hidden kingdoms of the earth, but within the silent, sacred space of every human soul. These documentaries are only possible because of the direct support of our community. If you believe in this mission and want to become a direct supporter of this channel, helping me bring more stories to life, please consider clicking the join button below. As always, thank you for your time and attention.